Good to go, Glenn.
All right. Ignore the title slide because I'm not there anymore, but the material we'll be pulling from in this deck is relevant, so I'll clean it up slightly before I send it out to our moderators to share afterward. I find it's better if this stuff is not in front of you, distracting you on your own desktop. So we'll take out that silly stuff. And then what I guess I want to have you understand today is Bookmarklets is a nice entry point for programmers because it uses JavaScript, which is one of the most easy to learn and universal languages out there. It was the first language to be fully integrated with HTML, so it really works nicely with web pages. And as you'll see, it doesn't require something fancy like installing a browser extension. In fact, you don't even need to have Chrome, which can be very useful when you want to have extension-like functionality and you work at a place where they don't allow you to have Chrome, or you can have Chrome, but you can't log into your personal account and thus you can't access your extensions. So there, if you've never been in one of those organizations, someday you might, because even today, some super secure firms do not like that browser. So Bookmarklets will give you some powerful functionality cross-browser, which is great. Where do we use it? Well, obviously, this is a sourcing-related session, so I'll try to focus it on things that help with sourcer productivity. There are some folks who have created scrapers with Bookmarklets. I guess that could be done, but as we know, there are some very full-featured tools out there that are pretty flexible, like Data Miner, for example, or Outwit Hub. And I would say if scraping is your game, I would take advantage of one of those tools that already has a lot of functionality built in. But for pretty much everything else, Bookmarklets can be a big time saver and is just as easy to install and run as anything else you could imagine. So the most common use is for avoiding to have to go to a website, go to the search form, enter stuff, run the search. You can do all of that in a Bookmarklet. So I commonly use them for the various lookups that we would do on various sites, and you'll see how that's easily embedded in a little bit of code. And we'll show you a few different ways you can create your Bookmarklets, and you may find one to be simpler than another. This one, unfortunately, does not exist anymore. I'm going to have to give you a substitute, but again, it doesn't really have to be in Chrome. More specific to Firefox, they all are cross-browser if you do it the way that I'm going to show you here. So let's say that you wanted to have the ability to search a website and leverage some of the special things that they have. This one should work okay. Of course it isn't. Why would that work? Let's try another one. That would be more interesting. All right. So here's a Longish Google search. And if you wanted to have that search, but with the ability to change just a couple of parameters in it each time you run it, then what is good about a Bookmarklet is you can have the piece of your search that you want to have consistent in the URL built in, and then the piece that you want to have variable can be something that you manipulate. So let's see if we can figure out how we might do that. I'm gonna, oh yeah, we'll use that one too. Okay. So here's a URL. And just to show you, you really don't need anything fancy. You can create these things in WordPad. Works just fine. So I would like to be able to cover, say, major cities in Texas for this search. So this is a Stack Overflow kind of search here. So the parts of the URL that I'm going to want to vary are, of course, the city here. Looks like Dallas. And looks like Houston comes up a couple times. And we have San Antonio. So for whatever major cities you think you want to include for a given state, we'll create a variant of this. Let's say you were, so if someone picks Texas, we wanted to throw these in. If they picked Massachusetts, we probably want to put in Boston, Worcester, Springfield, a few other big ones out there. Okay. So here's where you could use your bookmarklet. And I'm going to skip ahead to a couple of things that are kind of ready to go. And again, you're going to get all these slides, so please don't feel like you have to copy stuff down. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of just the least amount you need to know for the JavaScript syntax, because I know this stuff looks a little bit convoluted here. In fact, maybe I'll start with one that's even simpler. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger for those of you who are probably having a little trouble looking at my screen. So in the old days of creating bookmarklets, you had to be very careful about spaces because it was effectively going to break your URL into pieces. That's no longer true with the current browsers. They're smart enough to know how to handle that. So all of these things that say %20, some of you may know from ASCII code equivalents, that's the character equivalent for a space. So I don't need to have those anymore. You can do just a regular space for those. And because it's written in JavaScript, but your browser doesn't necessarily know that, when we end up putting it in our browser as a bookmark later, we're going to need to begin the whole thing with JavaScript : I'm going to leave that here at the top by itself for now. And I'll break this up into some pieces so you can see a little easier what's going on with it. If you've ever seen JavaScript written, it tends to look more like what I'm showing you here. So every statement in JavaScript ends with a semicolon, with rare exception. So that's your way to know that you're at the end of something. Bar in front of anything means you're about to name a variable. Now, you know, in some languages, you don't need to put bar in front of anything, but it's helpful here because you want to name it something that's specific to this function in your JavaScript. So in case you are on a web page that has its own variables assigned to those same variable names, it won't conflict. So var is your way to specify that it's your specific one within the function that you're going to create here. And I'm saying for this variable s that if you've highlighted any text on the page already, that I want you to grab that. So get selection means it's going to pull whatever you've highlighted on the page already. And I'm going to assign that selection if you have highlighted some text to that variable s. Otherwise, else, I'm going to say that s is going to be assigned to this. So what is this? So document means the web page you're on. Document dot, and then that's a property. So I'm saying within the document, there's going to be a selection, and I'm going to create a text range to enter stuff in that. And I'm going to create another variable called t, which is going to be a prompt. And you'll see prompts quite often in JavaScript. That's where you got a little thing that pops up on your screen that will then ask you to fill in something in a little text box. So I can tell it what to say above that text field so that you know what I'm asking you to enter. So in this case, I want you to enter a root domain. And you'll see why we're doing that in a second, because this is going to be a lookup for the domain on a popular Whois site. So I'm going to say, please enter your root domain there. If you've already highlighted it, then that's going to be pre-populated in that field. So it'll already be in there. Of course, we'll be able to erase it if that's not what we meant to have. And then the important part here, I'm going to tell the browser to change my location. So I'm not staying on the page that I'm on. I want it to go to a new URL. And that new URL is going to be this Whois site that I like, followed by whatever I typed for that prompt. And sometimes people put funky characters in that field. So escape is just a way to make sure that the browser will have no problem handling it. I don't know. I'm not really worried because it's going to be a domain with a dot. So I think we can have just a plain T. That'll work just as well in this case. And then there's a final slash in the URL of that kind of page. So it'll end up taking us to this URL slash, throws in the thing that we put in the prompt, and then last but not least adds a final slash to it. And all of those text elements you probably have noticed are being surrounded with apostrophes. JavaScript also would let you use quotation marks. Sometimes that can be a little confusing. So you just want to be consistent with whichever way you're going to do it. And because T is a variable, I don't put quotes or apostrophes around that. I want to be treated as the variable T. And so if I want to do that, it's okay if I've broken it up into these lines that are separate like this, because I've got a little tool that I use to squeeze it all back together the way we want. And you'll get this URL in what I send you also. And good tip there from Tom about using a code editor if you'd like to do it that way. Again, you don't have to for bookmarklets because they're pretty simple code-wise, but I agree it can be easier to follow if you're doing it that way. And the thing that I'm going to do it in, just to show you how cross-browser this whole thing is, let's run some of these things in old Internet Explorer. So I'm not even talking Microsoft Edge. I'm talking version 11 Internet Explorer. You'll see all this stuff works just as well there. If you're forced to use an old browser, you're going to be just fine. So I need to create a bookmark or a favorite for it, and I'm going to put my code into it. But before I put it into it, I want to squeeze it, get rid of all those extra lines. And so the tool that I like to use for that Let me expand this a little bit. Is this thing here by Mr. Coles, Peter Coles. He created this a long time ago, but it still works just fine. So all you have to do is put your JavaScript code in this box. And we'll talk later about jQuery, but I can just click this convert to bookmarklet, and it will take out the lines and any other thing that's weird. Notice it also threw that JavaScript colon in front, which is a requirement. So it basically just turned all that into this up here. And now we can make a favorite for this. So it doesn't really matter what page I'm going to use. I'm just going to add any old page to my favorites. I do want to make sure I'm putting it in the right folder, though. I'd switch the folder if this wasn't where I wanted it. And since I know this is going to be my Who Is bookmarklet, I'll just call it Who Is. And maybe I'll put enter domain to remind me that it's going to be a prompt for a domain. So I now have this new favorite sitting in my browser. And again, you can use any browser. Just make sure to go to properties of that bookmark. So if you right click it, I think in Chrome, you just select edit. In IE, we just go to properties. I'm just going to paste that long block of code here in the URL field to replace what was there before. And now you'll see, if I run this.
All right. And then how'd you hear about this opportunity? Was it
See, it gives me a little prompt on my screen, and it's saying, what is the root domain that I want to search for? So I'm going to say, who is the owner of Gutmacher.net? Again, I hadn't highlighted anything on the page, so that's why I didn't pre-populate it. But if I had already picked a tool, if I had already highlighted some text and I selected the bookmarklet, notice that it already put these words bookmarklet creator in there. Of course, that's not my domain I want to search on, but it just to show it does recognize any highlighted text you may have had already. And I hit enter, and now it launches a new tab and brings me that whois.domaintools.com, Gutmacher.net, throwing in that value that I entered in that prompt field, and here's the info. So there's a relatively simple bookmarklet that does something quite useful, prompt on the screen for something you need, and then sends you there. And I feel like I should pause for a second because that's probably the first bookmarklet anyone's ever seen deconstructed. Someone says, do it again. You want to do the same one, or we want to do something a little bit? All right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make this a little fancier than what it is right now. So right now it's just looking for that root domain on that site. But what if I happen to be on some website at the moment and I want to find out who the owner of that domain is? It would be nice if this bookmarklet could recognize what site I'm already on and just take that domain and run the search on that without me having to enter anything. So I can do that with a slight change here. So what I want to grab is what's called the root of the domain. So if you're not sure how to look up different things, this is something I do quite often. You want to know what the root domain of something is. And I can type that in. So you can see it's called location.host. And they give you a few different ways to figure it out. This one's kind of fancy. I like this one. what it's doing here is it's saying, well, what if you were on a web page like that is a subdomain like app.foo.mysite.com? You don't want it to look up the who is for app.foo. You want it just to look up mysite.com. So they have said, I'm going to take that location host, and then I'm going to split it in pieces based on where dots occur in that web address. So in this case, we'll use the example that's a little bit long here. You can see it's got dots between app and foo, foo and my site and com. So that split function in JavaScript basically just turns that into several pieces. And then each of those pieces is what's called an array. I imagine some of you have dealt with that if you've done any programming. So just to break that down a little bit. If this were, let's say I'm going to, sorry, I've got a phone in the background that is no longer ringing. So let's say that I assign a variable to it the way that they're going to do it here. I'll show you what they're doing here.
And why should the bright star?
So they're saying, split this into pieces, and we're going to assign the variable temp to it. So we'll pretend that temp equals this thing. And then by splitting it by the dots, it means that temp element, the first temp element, which is going to be temp 0. Remember, 0 is the first number when you're dealing with computer arrays. So that equals app in this case. That's the first piece when you split it by the dots. Temp 1 is going to be the next piece. Third piece is going to be temp 2. These are square brackets going around each of these, those of you who remember arrays, and finally com. So if I want to create a who is search for this, I'm going to want it to search for mysite.com. But I don't know how many different elements there are going to be for any given URL. So what they wisely decided to do is they said, well, after you split it into its pieces, reverse them all. So what does that do? That means that now com is going to be the first thing, and then my site is going to be the second thing. So they've changed the order around. So this is now temp 0. Oops. What am I doing? And this now becomes temp 1. Well, that's brilliant because I want to be able to go to mysite.com. So I'm going to say that the root domain, give it another variable called root domain, is going to be temp 1. That would come before the .com part. So I'm going to look for that, followed by temp 1, followed by temp 0. So that'll be a mysite.com in this case. So that should do exactly what we're looking for, no matter what domain we enter. So I'm going to throw that into this. So instead of it saying I'm just going to go creating a text range, I'm just going to have it go look for that site.
Bless you.
Or you know what, maybe I'll populate it here just to make sure it's what you meant to do. So S, instead of being a
So can you tell me any sort of
a selection, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make
really proud of?
this the piece that it brings in. So we'll change it ever so slightly, and we'll say, we can keep most of this. All right, so we're going to have I guess we do need the beginning part of that. Sorry. We do want to create a window. But I'm going to populate it with, not with S. I'm going to populate it with this. So I want it to say, enter the root domain, but I'm going to take a guess that you mean to take the root domain of the page you're already on, in which case I'm going to say, take the root domain. And I'll have that showing in the field right from the beginning. And if that's indeed what you want to end up using, we're all set to go. So let's see if that works. If T, go there. All right. Let's see if that does what we expected. And again, I don't have to use the Bookmarklet creator. If I want to just make a bookmarklet on my own, there's not much I have to do to this. I just need to put JavaScript : in front of it, get rid of any line returns. I'm just going to each line and doing a backspace to make sure I got no extra line returns in here. So that should work just fine as a JavaScript in a bookmarklet also. So let's try putting that in our bookmarklet. So I'm going to make a new who is bookmarklet, and this will be, I'll call it who is site you are on. And then I will go to the properties of that bookmarklet, paste in the new block of code I just created, and let's see if that works. So we're going to go to some random site. There's a random site. And now I'm going to see if I can find its who is owner for site you're on. It does not look like anything happened when I selected that. So that makes me think something is not quite right.
Looks like you got 9 to 10 years of speaking experience. Is that kind of what you would say too?
I don't see anything wrong with this. Oh, someone said, Tom said we have an issue with an extra period. Oh, the leading period may be a problem. That's interesting. Maybe. All right. Let's try getting rid of that.
As far as the salary goes, what are you currently making?
Yeah, I just copied that from the other site, but I guess I should have looked a little closer. There may have been a reason why they had that extra period in front. But I agree with you. I don't know why we need an extra period in front of the mysite.com. So that's fine. We'll just make a slight edit on that bookmarklet. Copy the new code. Paste it in without that extra dot. And if that solves the problem, gold star for our friend about that. Well, Tom, it seems to be something beyond that issue. I don't know why it doesn't like that. So I apologize. I don't know why we are. It's not running. That bookmarklet should be just fine. All right, well, I don't want us to get too derailed over that example. We will figure out what the little syntax issue was, because I'm sure it's something really tiny, and that's, frankly, can happen quite a bit. One thing you could do is you could put this in one of these nice little code testers that there are out there. There's a whole bunch for JavaScript. So if you want, you could just go JavaScript code checker. And you can see there are a whole bunch of code checkers out there. I'd probably want something that can just do it right online, where I don't have to download or install anything. I have a feeling this one probably will do it. So let's see. So I'm going to paste my code right there. Obviously, I do not want that leading JavaScript colon. That's not part of regular JavaScript. And we'll see if it found any errors here. It didn't like that. Why not?
I'm totally offended by that. And then are you currently interviewing for any other positions right now?
All right, my apologies. That may not be the best one to use. It doesn't seem to like that. I know that I have some other ones I've used for checking code. Let's see.
So I'm going to get all your information over the ready before I leave here evening. As soon as they let me know whether or not they'd like to bring you in for the first round is actually interview. They're pretty good about giving me down all next week, so I'd ideally like to get you back before that to get a phone interview on the phone.
So this is a nice little tool for taking your condensed code and turning it back into regular JavaScript. In this particular site, all I had to do was paste that block in and hit Control Enter, and as you can see, it cleaned it all up very quickly. So this would allow us to see much faster, I think, if there's something wrong with this. And again, I'm not seeing anything jumping out at me that would indicate what the error is. So, all right, let's go back to our presentation then. And I'll show you one that I came up with recently that I thought was pretty interesting. And I'll save this just so we have a reference here. I'll send you the clean version of this later once we figure that out. And the one I'm going to show you.
Dude, I hire recruiters for applicants.
For which role?
Or yeah, sorry. I was like, I don't know. I think the only
So we have this one here. And so what's going on in this one is it's prompting for someone's name, and it's saying we're going to launch 8 different tabs for 8 different sites that typically give you good people information. So in one click, I'll be able to search a lot of different sites for data at once. So you having this one, it'll be easy for you to customize it so that you can have it check whatever site you want it to check. So I don't have to go through the whole thing because a lot of it is repeating code for each additional site that I'm trying to run it on. But what it's doing is at the very beginning, same stuff we've been seeing before of looking for any name that you may have already highlighted on the page, and it'll throw that in. But if you have not, it's going to prompt you to enter the first name and last name of the person. And then it's going to split it. So splitting, we've already mentioned, is where you figure out what's between the different pieces of your variable, and then you can just deal with the individual pieces. So if I'm entering a first name space last name, I'll want to have it split by the space so that I can deal with the first name and last name as individual variables. The other thing I might want to do, just to error proof it a little bit, sometimes people will paste a name, but they may have spaces on either side of it. To get rid of those extra spaces that someone might put in a text field, we can just do a trim function in JavaScript. So I'm going to say whatever that value is for t that you're going to enter in this prompt, I'm going to say t equals t.trim. And that will get rid of the spaces on either side. And now I'll do the variable that's going to take the split of all that into its pieces. And once it's split in pieces, then I want to do a timeout function. And the reason you need a timeout is because I found that if you try to launch too many windows too quickly, some browsers will just block it. So you need to put in a slight time delay before each window opens up to make sure that they all open consecutively. And we can still do this in a matter of milliseconds, so the amount of time that it actually delays is barely noticeable. So I'm saying with this timeout, I'm going to have it open a window. That's window.open. And in that new window, which is really a new tab, it's going to go to this website, and then it's going to throw in our variables. So remember, we want to take first name and last name. Q1, index 1 of Q, that's really the second part of that variable. So that's going to be the last name. So you need to know the format of the site that you search on to know what it likes. So this people by name site expects to see the last name, then a slash, then the first name. So that's what I've got here. Last name, slash, and then Q0 is the first name. And I'm going to specify the dimensions of that window. I'd like it to be 600 by 800.
I'm looking at this webinar.
And I don't want it to be too wide.
Wow, what's up?
If we could ask some people who are unmuted to mute themselves if you're not asking a question, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Where are you looking?
So the dimensions are 600 by 800, so it doesn't overwhelm your screen, because we're going to have a bunch of these open up. And I can even specify where they open up compared to the screen. So I can have its indent.
This is outside the box.
I'm going to start this one at 0. So it'll be right at the top left corner of the screen. But when I do it for the next URL, you'll notice that I'm going to set those values at 20 pixels offset. So the next window is going to open up 20 pixels down and 20 pixels in from the previous one. And you'll see that's going to make it a little easier for me to view all of these things when we're all done. And each of them gets their own little time delay. All right, so Mike, it sounds like people are recommending you mute everyone but me. If you have that ability, feel free to do that.
With you having presenter mode, you have that function. So you should be able at the top there, click mute everyone else.
All right, I'm going to do this temporarily, and then I'll bring it back to open it up for questions as soon as we run this particular bookmarklet. So let's take this big block, and it is a big block, but that's okay. JavaScript, I mean, there are limits to the length of a bookmarklet, but we're not at it yet. We should be okay with this. I will show you a bookmarklet that was a little bit too long, and I'll show you how I was able to condense it without losing functionality and still do what I needed to do. So let's go back to our browser, and we'll create a new. I like this particular one. I'm going to save this. All right. So let's call this one our enter name 8 tab. So this is going to search 8 different tabs for this information. So I'm going to go into that bookmarklet, right-click, properties, paste in our big block of code here. And now let's see if it does what we hope it should do. I'm going to select it. And you can see it's got a script prompt here up at the top. I didn't have to move this window. It just says enter first name, last name. And it's recommending you log into connect.data.com because I think that's one of the sites that it's going to pull data from. But that's okay, not really necessary. So I enter the name and I hit enter. And now watch what's happening. You see all these different tabs are now launching one after the other. Inset 20 pixels from each of the previous ones, so that way you realize this isn't just one window here, it's a whole bunch of different windows. And that's good, right? Because you want to make sure that people don't realize there's stuff hidden there that you may have lost. So each of these sites is taking my name and it's putting it in the right place in the URL to generate the data. So if I go to the page and I say, oh, this isn't really what I was looking for, I close that tab, no problem. I'm now on the next result that was on the tab just behind it. And there's that one. And maybe that's got what I need. If so, I don't close it. But if it's not what I want, I'll close it. Go to the next one. Here's data.com. Used to be Jigsaw. Yeah, this is pretty good. I don't think I want to close this one. So I'll minimize that window. And here's white pages. I think this one is going to make me pay to see the data. So I'll skip that one. This one didn't do so good, nor did this. And not so sure about that one. And, oh, but people by name is pretty good. So I've got, if I Alt-Tab to go between my open windows, I can see that there were a few that were pretty good. So I'll keep those 3. I think I minimized one of them. So let me unmute, because I think people will probably have some questions about that. So what's been going on in the chat? I missed that.
Hey, Glenn, it's Susanna. This is all really helpful information. I just commented that bookmarklets would be a really useful way to cross-reference people's associated social sites as well. What you're showing is absolutely great. I'm just kind of brainstorming additional ways that I would be able to use it in my day-to-day sourcing process.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to search for that name across different social networks to find their profiles. I would be happy to create an alternate version of the bookmarklet that does just that.
Ooh, and I would love to help you.
Okay. Well, I accept that offer, and you'll be the first recipient of it. And if it works well, we can share that along with the other ones that we'll have from this.
Well, with the 2 of us, I'm sure it will work well. So no ifs about it.
And again, really the hardest part of this, once you have the template for how it worked for this one, is I just need to know the format of the URL based on populating a particular name that would reveal that person or persons with that name on each of the sites. So if you can just forward me over, you can use my name or your own name as the example one and just say, here's what the Facebook URL would be with that name, and here's what the Twitter one would be, and so on, and I should be able to edit the bookmarklet accordingly.
Well, Glenn, this is Lenore. I have a really simple question.
Go for it.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I do.
So, our booklets basically are shortcuts for search content that has been created in code. Would that be a definition?
Well, that's one way to use it. So it's really any way that you want your browser to interact with a web page. So for sourcers, using it as a search tool is obvious, but it can be a scraper. It can be something to fill in web forms. So that's an interesting example I can show briefly. Those of you who were at the last SourceCon in Austin hopefully saw Morgan Allen's presentation where he showed how he could use jQuery within a Chrome extension. And so he was effectively clicking buttons automatically with his JavaScript code in jQuery. It just happened to be housed in a Chrome Chrome extension, but it could also have been housed in a bookmarklet. So I haven't had time to fully deconstruct that, but I can give you a simpler example of how you could apply that kind of thing. So let's take a fairly simple example here. So we have web forms that have obviously fields on them, and if you could have it automatically enter stuff in a field, press the submit button, all that kind of stuff, that would be kind of interesting. So the one that I got to work today that I thought was kind of useful was for mailtester.com, which I think is probably most people's favorites. It's one of the best ones for showing you if there's a true result on a match. Let's see. Let's take this. Not the one I want. Should be good. Okay. So where did we have that? Not this tab. Right, here we go. So let's say that I'm on, well, to figure out how to, I suppose there's a way to make it go to the tab and then do something. But so again, a lot of you use Mail Tester. So here's the page. It would be nice if I could take the name that I've already highlighted somewhere and just have it fill out the form and all that stuff, or a prompt for data. So that code, we'll enter it here under Mail Tester Submit. So it's looking for an email address to test. So I'll put my work email. That should work. So what is this going to do now? I've entered it in the prompt. The prompt says enter it in the field on the form where the email address goes, and then click the check address button on that page and show me the result. So that's what the bookmarklet did. It did all the form fill out and submit. That was all built into the bookmarklet. So depending on what forms you're using, if you've got multiple fields on a form, you could theoretically have it go to, say, an Excel file where you've got a bunch of people and you want to go checking their email address here on Mail Tester. You could have it just run down the file, name after name, and say, grab, the email address in row 1 here, paste it into that email address field, click check address, launch another tab, go enter the email address on row 3 and so on, and have it just pop, do it. I think there are some bulk email address verifiers, so that may not be the best example, but you certainly can use a form fill out that way. The other one that was interesting, and yes, everyone is going to get the bookmarklets that I've shown today. There is a starter set that I have publicly on my website. So for those of you who absolutely just can't wait until after the call, go ahead to recruiting-online.com/bookmarklets. And I've got a little sample set there of bookmarklets that you can grab. And the way that I display them, which I think is kind of nice, is in a tool called Bookmarklet Combiner. So big thanks to Aaron Lintz, who showed me Bookmarklet Combiner, God, it must be 3 years ago now, maybe more. And what Bookmarklet Combiner does is it allows you to have sets of bookmarklets saved, and they appear in a nice little column on your browser. So this is what the site looks like. This is totally free, as is everything else I've shown you today. So what you do is you enter what you want to have the bookmarklet be called, so same as your title of a favorite. And then in this URL field, that's where you put in all of that JavaScript code, starting with JavaScript : and then you can keep adding one after another. It'll let you add more. You can have a dozen The only real restriction practically is just, would it overshoot the length of your page? So I've created some of these, and once you're done creating it, you get to rename it. So you don't call it this. You can call it, like the one I created is called lots of bookmarklets for the sourcing user group that we have in Boston that I created. So once you rename it, you literally just click and drag this up to your bookmarks bar, and you have this new set of favorites. So I've already done a few of these. So if I go under Chrome bookmarklets, let's see, I should have, yeah, here we go. So I have a whole bunch of sets. So what happens is when you pull it up, it ends up being one of these things here. And so this BOTSA set that I've already created, watch what happens when I click this. See, look how it just created this nice list. So all of those JavaScript injected favorites now just appear in one long column, very convenient. And all you had to do to load all of these bookmarklets is just drag this one little button into your favorites bar. So that's a great way to create and share a set of bookmarklets with other people. The only negative about it is it does not work in the old Microsoft IE 11 that I was in. Actually, I don't think it works in Microsoft Edge either, now that I think about it. So most of you, I think, are Google Chrome addicts. Those of you who are Firefox, that's fine too. You should have no problem using Bookmarklet Combiner, and you can share your sets of bookmarklets. So that's what you'll get when you go to that list. So one more fun one before we get to the top of the hour. Not that I'm happy to stay longer, but I know there were some folks who said they might not stay past. So this is an interesting one that I created in response to a request for, let's see, yeah, this one. So somebody was saying, well, what if I don't find someone's email address with all the different lookup tools that are out there, the contact outs and the Lucias and the profits and everything else? Can I at least find their work email address? Well, we know that most companies have a consistent email format, and you can look that up. But what if you don't have time to do that? Or if those methods seem inconclusive, you can use this. So what this bookmarklet does is it says, we'll take whatever root domain and name of the person that you have, and we'll test all of them. So let me show you how that works. So it might be better for me to show it to you, and then we'll take you through a little bit of the code. So where do I have it? I think I saved it in both browsers, but we'll do it in IE here. So here's the permutations. So I enter a name. And if it had been highlighted on the page already, it would have been populated. Now you can see that it did realize that I was on the mail tester website, so it populated that as the domain. It was guessing that's what I wanted. Of course, that's not the site that I want. I want it to test against SpadeStreet.com, so I'm going to enter that instead. And this has the thing that does the trim. So if you accidentally entered spaces on either side, it's going to clean that up. So what happens after I enter my name and domain in that bookmarklet? It's going to launch my default email program, whatever I have. So probably it's Outlook for a lot of you. And it puts first name dot last name at that domain in the to field. And then it does all the other common variations in the BCC field. Now, why do I do that? Well, because I don't know which one's right, but I don't want somebody seeing me sending a message to 15 different emails. So they only see the one address that's in the to field, but all the other ones that I think could be right, I'm going to put in the BCC field so it doesn't clutter up the message that they visibly see. But what's going to happen, of course, is a bunch of these are not going to be valid. I'm going to get a bounce back notification, but not for all of them, right? One of them is going to go through. So the one that doesn't bounce back is the good one. and that message goes through. And it also has a pre-built-in subject line and a pre-built-in, hi, Glenn, took the first name out of the name, found some information about you at, and it's taking that website and page title of the page that I was on before. That may or may not be relevant. So of course, this message is not being sent, it's just being populated. So I can edit this message however I want before I actually send it. So that's one fun little thing. And then some people were saying, well, that's all great, Glenn, but a lot of companies now are starting to use middle initial as their in the email address. But I don't see the person's middle initial. How do I know what the right email address is in that case? To which I say, no problem, we'll test them all. So I'm going to prompt, I've got a bookmarklet called middle initial permutations. So I'll do the same thing, put my name in. But sure, we'll leave it as mail test or whatever. So what did this do? It put in the normal first dot last because it's the most common, but notice what's going on in the BCC field. I'm testing Glenn.A.Gutmacher. I'm testing Glenn_A_Gutmacher and every other letter of the alphabet there, and it's going out. So the only danger of doing this method, of course, is I am sending, in this case, 53 messages, the whole alphabet, 2 variations, plus the one in the to field. And if you do that too often, of course, against the same company, you could get on the radar of one of the system admins, because just because the recipient doesn't see all those BCCs, they are indeed hitting the server of that company. So just be careful about using this one too often. This is kind of a last resort if you can't figure out what their email is. All right, so did I mute everybody? I hope I didn't. No. So if we have other questions, we got a few minutes, it sounds like. I'll pause there.
I don't know about questions, but you certainly have had some people ringing your praises on our chat here. We're not worthy, Glenn.
Well, you're all going to be worthy because you're going to know how to create these yourself, or at the very least, you can use the ones I've already done, and then you, without too much knowledge of JavaScript, you can just replace, you know, the website, for example, that I'm checking against with your website that you want to do, or whatever values. It's not that hard. Again, all of this is JavaScript code. The ones that fill out a web form, it's JavaScript with jQuery. So if you haven't taken the basic course on Code Academy on jQuery, that's a nice way to introduce yourself to what that does. It just gives a little more functionality on top of JavaScript. It's not a new language. It's just extra commands for JavaScript.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to include a link to that Code Academy resource whenever we publish the wrap-up here. Great.
Yeah, I've always learned something from those. It's a great introduction because they give you little chunks to learn, and it's interactive, and if you get it wrong, they give you a hint, and for a free site, it's pretty impressive.
Wonderful. Thank you.